sparkly beans, and happy May Day. I'm here for you with a quick reflection, I hope quick, in celebration of May Day, of the eclipse we had yesterday in Taurus, Taurus season and generally. I wanted to do a little reflection about Taurus and pacing and the Hierophant that I've been meaning to for a while, and how it kind of relates to work and labor and other such topics. If you're new here, my name is Avery, and I help folks who are passionate about liberation and justice to find themselves as well as their roles in an emerging future. And I love to do that through making different connections to different topics, including astrology and tarot. So today we're talking about Taurus, and the sort of theme or the idea that this is gathered around is related to Taurus being associated with the Hierophant card in the tarot and how that connects to pacing from our values. So we know that Earth as an element is associated with grounding, stability, sometimes even stillness. We know that Taurus is a sign that if you don't know anything about Taurus, often the first thing you'll hear is Taurus are stubborn, right? There's that Taurus stubbornness sort of quick take stereotype about Tauruses. And it's not to say that that isn't part of the energy, but I think it's interesting to reflect on and think about what stubbornness means and if that's totally right. Because the thing is that Earth does shift, it just shifts slower than other elements. So, you know, erosion is an example of this over time. The planet itself spins, but slow enough that we can't literally feel it. You know, you can think of other examples of the Earth element being kind of slow and steady energy, and in particular inertia. I think inertia is a really important theme here. So inertia is the idea that things take a significant amount of force to get out of either stillness or movement. And I think that is in some ways key to what we're talking about. So if you think about what it means to be grounded and rooted in your purpose, in your values, then there is some level of steadiness and slowness, but not necessarily eternally stable or static. Not necessarily static. I think that's actually, like, I would not consider static to be a Taurus keyword, but I would consider stable. I would consider inertia. I would consider sustainability. And when you think about some of the things that are associated with Taurus include this slowness, the stubbornness, but also quality, comfort. You know, a Taurus tends to, the example I always use, I think I've used in my Astro 101 series, which you can check out, Practical Astrology 101 playlist on my channel, and you can see that I've recently done some fundamentals, one of which I talked about signs. So I think I brought this up, is that Taurus, I always think of the sort of really maybe fairly expensive purchase, like a pair of really good high quality shoes that lasts a long time and that has a benefit over time. So Taurus has the ability to sniff out things that will sustain them and support them, foundation, earth, over time, and to weed out the sort of smaller, quicker things that may provide a momentary benefit, but not a lasting one. It's a really beautiful thing about Taurus. And then Taurus is associated in tarot with the card of the Hierophant. And again, I have a tarot study series where you can learn more about the Hierophant. I'll try to remember to put these in cards above so you can get to them quickly. But the Hierophant you might wonder, like, what's the connection there? And we were having a really interesting discussion actually yesterday on one of the lives for Diana Rose Harper's Patreon, which I would recommend. Amazing astrologer. But we were talking about this, the Hierophant and Taurus, and how some folks were kind of like, oh, I don't know, like, how does this connect? I think in my view of the Hierophant, it really does, because if you think of the Hierophant not just as the sort of, sometimes the Hierophant is seen as like tradition and religion, but I very much see the Hierophant as embodying spiritual authority of maybe the Pope figure that is pictured on some tarot cards, actually embodying that yourself, that it's not about necessarily external authority, although it might involve received wisdom and inspiration and even listening to quote unquote spiritual authority, but then filtering it through your own spiritual authority and developing your own values, your own belief system is a very important part to me. The Hierophant in astrology, we have Venus and we have Jupiter. Venus rules Taurus, but Venus and Jupiter are both planets that do involve belief, do involve values, but Taurus, in my view, is more of a personal, and Venus, Taurus, are more of our personal beliefs, our deeply held beliefs that are core to us, maybe shared, but maybe come from somewhere, but are ours. And then Jupiter is more when we're talking about ideologies and collective, how we collectively like interpret and describe belief. Think of the sign of Sagittarius there. Which is one of the signs that Jupiter rules. So if we come back to Taurus, and what is Taurus and how does the Hierophant help us to look into that, I had this thought about pacing from values because, values certainly can shift, but our values tend to shift slower than maybe our actions or what's happening around us. Ideally, when we have a sense of our held values, they are sort of core, and they may shift and change over time. My experience has been less that my core values have shifted and changed over time, and more that my understanding of the way the world and the way actions and the way behaviors relate to those values has changed. So maybe, the way I practice a certain value could do a total 180 flip when I realize that something I think is acting in my values isn't. But the values themselves aren't really moving as much. And so, you can think almost of like Taurus as being a sign that represents if you're a ship, then Taurus being the thing that anchors that ship, the values that anchor that ship, and also the personal relationship to embodied pleasure, to your understanding your own birthright, to have abundance, to have pleasure, not at the expense of others, but understanding the natural abundance around us in the earth, Taurus, and then the inherent within ourselves, deservability or worth. Because Taurus, again, also talks to resources and worth, and sometimes money, but it's not just money, right? It's, so the shoes may be expensive, but it's deeper than that around resourcing. So I think like a Hierophant, Taurus is a center that can't be swayed by just little pokes or little digs or little disagreements. But that doesn't mean that it's not receptive and listening. And so when we call Taurus stubborn, I think we should consider that Taurus is actually an energy that is still willing to adapt or consider ways of doing things differently, just from a particular center. So the purpose may be stable, but the enactment of it is not always stable. So if we take this and we say, okay, so maybe the stubborn thing is a little unfair. Maybe it's actually the Taurus is very rooted in their values. And when it might get a little too stuck, maybe, a time that needs shaking up is when it's hard to see the ways in which others' beliefs and ideas aren't necessarily a challenge to our core values, but maybe pointing us and helping us to see ways in which we could live even more into our core values. To as I always say in my work, spiral back to our own center, always becoming more and more ourselves. Taurus, with its focus on values, with its focus on resources, I think really is, the body as well, really spiraling inwards towards ourselves. Could be an association that you might have with Taurus. So Taurus being fixed earth does have this stability to it, but it's sustainability. It's choosing the thing that is really grounded and connected to who we are. And so now if we look at right now, as I'm posting this, it's May Day, and we also just had an eclipse yesterday. We also have Uranus in Taurus, which the eclipse was, interacting with. We have, and we can also think it with any eclipse, but that the North Node is in Taurus. My North Node happens to also be in Taurus, so I'm experiencing this really heavily right now as a nodal return, which is when the nodes return to the sign where the North Node returns to the sign where the North Node was at your birth. When the eclipses are happening with the North and South Node where they were at your birth, it can be a kind of reflection, a return to purpose, and a return to soul purpose, a return to sort of the soul's work in this lifetime. And for me, I think a part of that is around my own rhythms and cycles and pacing, and then around helping others to become more comfortable with and see other ways of rhythm and cycle and pacing, and to help folks forgive themselves. And so as it is to you, right? Forgive yourself if your rhythms and cycles and pacings don't line up with a capitalist worldview, with a culture, with modern culture, and the way everything is like boom, 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 expected to be, the expectation of perfectionism, the expectation of doing everything. Taurus has a wise discernment of saying, when a Taurus is at the top of their game, they know from the center of themselves what not to take on, because they know that when they take something on, they're probably going to stick with it for a while. And so it's like, what do I want to sustain? So I might ask this question, what are these planetary energies shaking up for you maybe around your day-to-day pacing, your rhythms, what your schedule is, whether you tend to forgive yourself when you don't meet goals, whether, what do your routines look like, and there's this relationship, by the way, between, Taurus and Virgo, both earth signs, in a lovely kind of trine relationship to one another naturally on the zodiac wheel, and flow really well together. Virgo is really into discernment, and Virgo can, I think, help you. The Virgo energy can help you kind of clear out the things that don't want to have that Taurus energy applied to them, that aren't stable and need to be sustained in your life. Virgo energy can help you to identify rhythms, routines, schedules, etc., what's supportive and what isn't supportive to you. So it's a good time to look at that. Is there anything that you've been putting that almost, my computer's talking to me. That's going to stay in, so just, my computer talks to me sometimes. Example of supportive systems. My computer talks to me, right? I've set up my notifications, my, whatever, to focus on the things that I personally really care about happening, and not to tell me about other things. For you, that may or may not work. But I've really been feeling into this as I've been working on an audio course that I'll be releasing at some point, I think pretty soon, around releasing some of the standards around productivity, the idea that everyone has to have a standard schedule. Everybody's operating on clock time or calendar time. If you're interested in astrology, you're probably either are already or starting to understand that clock and calendar time are arbitrary, well, not totally arbitrary, but they're standards that we've set on many overlapping cycles of time that different people relate to in different ways. And so if you need to slow down right now, if you need to ground in, if you feel really scattered and pulled away and I have these big dreams that I want to work on later, but I can't prioritize them, getting curious about that and understanding that there may be things you have to do that aren't as in alignment in this world, unfortunately, we do live under a lot of systemic oppression, and depending on who you are and how you're marginalized, you may find that you have less freedom to do this. But feeling into what might be possible around your own pacing and what your labor looks like and where that labor sustains you and doesn't sustain you. I'm considering that question not just in terms of money, but also in terms of the nature of the labor, the time spent on it, how it connects to your values, how it grounds you and centers you or doesn't. Getting curious about whether there are or aren't adjustments that might be made there can be really powerful. I have definitely found that even though I've been doing this work for a very long time, that these eclipses and this everything happening in Taurus right now, and we're having kind of a long period too as Mercury is going to retrograde into Taurus, this opportunity to really reflect. And so if something has been shaken up for you, Mercury retrograde, I think, is going to be an opportunity to reflect on how could I make adjustments, what could I prioritize. So I'm seeing ways in which the things that bring me Taurian pleasure, as well as that Hierophant sense of like, oh, this is aligned. I know my own, I trust myself and I know my own path. I see how that gets, the world pushes that off. Even in an intuitive spiritual business, how it can feel like, now I have to do it this way though, or like, I can't always be in my pleasure and joy. Well, why not? Could I serve from a place of pleasure and joy? Could I access my pleasure and at the same time have that be sustainable for me and abundant in the terms of resources? Maybe. So these are just some reflections. I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts below. Anything coming up for you with this eclipse? Any thoughts around pacing and how it relates to values? Or if you do have Taurus placements, if you're Taurus Sun or other placements, how do you relate to the stubborn stereotype? And do you find, is this at all healing for you? Do you find anything in this video resonant? I would be curious. If you enjoy this and other videos that I make on this channel and want to support, this is entirely supported by folks like you. You can see there is a Patreon link below. You can also totally sign up at queermagical.com for a completely free newsletter. Support is always optional, and I love providing resources for you. In the newsletter, I go into a lot more depth and detail about topics like these, and I would love to connect. Happy May Day, and have a great rest of your day whenever you're watching this.